Hello! You've reached episode 12, which is the last in the podcast series. The question of God. Has our civilization outgrown God? My name is Sophie Minerva. I'm a professor of philosophy at NLA University College in Oslo. This podcast series is the result of a pedagogical experiment I conducted last year, and 12 episodes have been made. The recording you are listening to is from cafe conversations I had with 4 students about questions related to God. The students were Thomas, Douglas, Astrid, and Hiromi. They represented different positions on the God question: new atheism, classical atheism, agnosticism, and Christian theism. Our starting point was the book Outgrowing God by the well-known atheist Richard Dawkins. The topic this time is Dawkins' response to cosmic fine-tuning and whether the claim in his book is correct. Has our civilization really outgrown God? Or have we rather outgrown Dawkins' views and, in recent years, even atheism as an intellectually coherent worldview? Let's join the conversation in the cafe this final time. Welcome everyone. We've reached the 12th and final study session, and I'd like to say that it has exceeded all my expectations. Your questions, reflections, and comments have been very good, I think. You've all come prepared and have contributed valuable thoughts and reflections. Now, although we discussed fine-tuning at some length in the last session, we didn't cover Dawkins' own responses to it. So, thanks to Thomas for agreeing to guide us through this key aspect of Dawkins' book. Please go ahead, Thomas.
Thanks. I'll summarize Dawkins' responses to the discovery of cosmic fine-tuning and the argument that there must be a fine-tuner, an intelligent and potentially divine agent responsible for the apparently unlikely life-permitting structure of the cosmos. Well, you won't be surprised that Dawkins doesn't agree that a fine-tuner of any kind is needed. He presents 3 arguments against such a notion. 1. The anthropic principle, an argument which he admits is weak. 2. The multiverse theory, an argument which he finds interesting. And 3. The unlikelihood of there being a designer, an argument which he thinks is a devastating blow to any design hypothesis. The first argument, the anthropic principle, notes how our observation of the universe is bound up with it being a life-permitting universe. Since we are here observing the universe, it is clear that the universe must be a life-permitting universe. Dawkins mentions an allegory about a man in front of a firing squad. Everyone shooting at him misses. How interesting, he thinks. I can observe that they all missed, and I can wonder why. Well, some might say he shouldn't wonder why the firing squad missed. After all, if they hadn't missed, he wouldn't be around to wonder about anything. However, nothing has been explained, right? The mere fact that he is still alive and able to wonder why the firing squad missed doesn't do anything to explain what really happened. Why did they miss? The dude has no clue, he just knows that he's alive. That's all. So, the so-called anthropic principle type of response to fine-tuning is not very impressive, as Dawkins admits. He writes that the surviving man, quote, could still, forgivably, wonder why they'd all missed, and toy with the hypothesis that they were bribed, unquote.
I agree with Dawkins for once. The fact that we couldn't question anything if our universe was not life-permitting doesn't explain why a life-permitting universe exists.
Right. This conclusion leads Dawkins to the next argument. The second argument is that fine-tuning can be explained by the hypothesis that our universe is just one universe in a multiverse of billions of universes.
Yeah, this is the response I favor.
Dawkins says that, quote, many scientists think, with good reason, that there are billions of universes like ours, unquote.
Excuse me, Thomas, what good reasons for believing in multiverses are there?
Well, he doesn't actually mention anything specific.
My point exactly. He is saying that if multiple universes exist, then cosmic fine-tuning could be explained without a designer. But where is the evidence that multiple universes actually exist? I have a quote here from astrophysicist Adam Frank. He writes, quote, "There is no empirically grounded scientific reason to believe there is such a thing as a multiverse of parallel realities," unquote. So Dawkins is just speculating. It is at best only half an argument, isn't it?
What do you mean, Hiromi? Why is the multiverse explanation only half an argument?
Because it is extremely speculative, let me try to make an illustration. Dawkins' book has many finely tuned arrangements of letters that form its chapters. You would infer that the book had an author, a designer, right? If I then suggested that Dawkins' book could be explained by chance instead of design, you would probably ask me how this could happen?
You're right. I would ask you about that.
My suggestion would be that if a large enough number of monkeys has existed for a long enough time, with a big enough supply of computers running Microsoft Word, then they could produce the book by chance. Would you ask for evidence for my theory?
Your monkey theory? I would ask for evidence, yes.
Sorry, I don't have any. So without any evidence for the monkeys with the computers and so on, would you think the many monkeys hypothesis is a better explanation for the existence of the book than the author hypothesis?
No, I guess not.
I think you have a point, Hiromi.
Thank you, Douglas.
However,
Why do you say however?
well, if I was already committed to the belief that no authors exist, I might think the many monkeys hypothesis was the way to go despite the lack of evidence for it. Likewise, because I'm already committed to a naturalistic worldview, I think the many universes hypothesis is the way to go, despite the lack of evidence.
But what about the evidence against the multiverse hypothesis, such as the problem of Boltzmann brains?
Boltzmann what?
Boltzmann brains. It's named after the German physicist Ludwig Boltzmann. Boltzmann brains are hypothetical observers. Imagine brains with some sense organs that could randomly fluctuate into existence out of the quantum vacuum. Of course, Boltzmann brains are very unlikely, but they're much more likely than the life-permitting fine-tuning of the universe. The possibility of Boltzmann brains suggests that if there is a multiverse, then most observers in the multiverse would probably be Boltzmann brains. So, the fact that we are more complex beings than Boltzmann brains is evidence against the existence of a multiverse. As cosmologist Luke Barnes says, the problem here, quote, is not that we might be Boltzmann brains. The problem is that we aren't. Another cosmologist, Rodney Holder, comments that the multiverse hypothesis, quote, is inconsistent with the amount of order found in this universe. Our universe is far more special than we would expect it to be, even if it were merely a random member of the subset of universes compatible with our existence, unquote.
I'm not familiar with the concept of Boltzmann brains. I'll have to think about that.
It's a thought experiment. Boltzmann brains illustrate how crazy things get when you invent multiple universes to explain away evidence from our universe pointing to God. It does no good for science either. The Columbia University physicist and mathematician Brian Greene warns that the multiverse hypothesis could undermine science. He writes, quote, when faced with seemingly inexplicable observations, researchers may invoke the framework of the multiverse, proclaiming some phenomenon or other to merely reflect conditions in our own bubble universe, and thereby failing to discover the deeper understanding that awaits us, unquote.
It seems to me that the multiverse speculation just opens up a Pandora's box of craziness without limits. I guess there could be a parallel universe where a parallel Richard Dawkins is the Pope and Thomas eats dragons for breakfast. Isn't that prospect rather hard to swallow?
Life can be hard to swallow, Hiromi. But maybe the multiverse is big enough to produce life by chance, but not big enough to produce multiple Richard Dawkins. Who knows?
In any case, let's say we accept the existence of a multiverse for the sake of argument. Philosopher Michael Roda argued that, quote, our evidence supports a designer, whether or not we're in a multiverse, because a theistic multiverse is a possibility. An atheistic multiverse would likely contain a higher proportion of life-permitting universes than would an atheistic multiverse. Thus, our relevant evidence is more to be expected on a theistic multiverse hypothesis than on an atheistic multiverse hypothesis, unquote. So, this means, if we were to find evidence for a multiverse sometime in the future, it would most probably be a created multiverse. Do you follow?
That's interesting.
All right, Astrid. Anyway, Dawkins's final and central argument concerns the improbability of any cosmic designer existing. He thinks this argument is the best.
Isn't that just the old "who created God" argument that we debunked in a previous session?
No? Is it?
Yes, I think so. Dawkins incorrectly assumes that any intelligent creator must be complex in the same design-indicating sense that the fine-tuning of the universe is complex. That's not the case. The life-specific fine-tuning of the universe is complex in the sense that it is an unlikely and therefore contingent arrangement of things. But what if God is not a contingent arrangement of things? What if God is a necessary being, like Aquinas argued?
I think you're right, Astrid. God is, by definition, a necessary being and cannot be complex in the way that physical things, like the fine-tuning of the universe or life on Earth, are complex. Dawkins' objection clearly commits the fallacy of begging the question against God being a necessary being.
Yeah, this is why I prefer the multiverse response to cosmic and biological fine-tuning. As the atheist philosopher Thomas Nagel observes when commenting on Dawkins' central argument, quote, "God is not a complex physical inhabitant of the natural world," unquote. And as atheist philosopher Eric Wielenberg says, Dawkins' quote, "central atheistic argument is unconvincing," unquote. And I agree.
But the multiverse hypothesis has so many problems that I do not find that convincing either. Not at all.
Well, everyone, we have discussed Dawkins' response to fine-tuning, and I think we'll have to leave the discussion there. Thank you so much for your inputs. We'll take a break now, and when we come back, we'll do a wrap-up. I will ask for your reflections on this whole book club process and whether it has changed anything in the way you see the world. Okay, we're back. So, dear students, we have come to the wrap-up. I'd like to hear a short summary of what you think after reading Dawkins' book. What are its strengths and weaknesses? Has the book or these conversations about it made you change any of your views? You'll have more time to reflect on this in the essay you're going to write, but we can share some initial thoughts now. Let's start with Thomas. What are your thoughts, Thomas?
I think that reading and discussing Outgrowing God has made my atheism a little less dogmatic is the term, I guess. Dawkins writes that some intelligent children, when they grow up, make their own judgments about what previous generations have said and reject what doesn't fit. Hence the title, Outgrowing God, right? I like Dawkins' encouragement to think for myself. I think that thinking is really important. After all, I'm an intelligent child of the universe, right? Anyway, I think my views have matured as I've looked more critically at Dawkins' claims. And some of his claims obviously don't add up. I actually feel a bit disillusioned.
Why disillusioned, Thomas?
Well, for example, he claims things all the time without giving evidence, in contradiction to his own advice about critical thinking. He provides hardly any footnotes, and there's no bibliography. Readers have to take almost everything he says on authority. That is, his authority. That's pretty ironic. We have looked at several examples where Dawkins is writing things that are completely wrong. The book has many unreliable assertions and bad arguments, unfortunately. I now understand why many atheists have distanced themselves from Dawkins.
Thank you, Thomas. It's interesting to hear how you've experienced this. Astrid, what are your thoughts?
As you all know, I've had some struggles with my mental health this term, and I missed a few meetings because of this. To be honest, it's been great to have this group to focus on. I found talking through our different viewpoints really interesting. I've even taken up knitting, thanks to Thomas. When I started reading Outgrowing God, I expected my Christian beliefs to be strongly challenged. There had been some glowing reviews of the book, such as the one in Arrow magazine. Dawkins is an eminent scientist with a PhD from Oxford University. He is a Fellow of the Royal Society, so I expected academic rigor and depth. I was astonished to see how thin and unfounded his arguments were. He kept making obvious mistakes in the logic of his arguments. I found at least a dozen claims in the book that are completely false. For example, that there is no archaeological evidence that King David ever existed, or that camels were not used during Abraham's lifetime. The book also contains misinformation about the design of the human eye and various other things. Dawkins's central argument for atheism is basically the question of who created God. This only reveals a failure on his part to understand the sort of specified complexity that points to design. I have a quote here from a critical review of Outgrowing God. It's from Rebecca McLaughlin. She writes, quote, Dawkins' book consistently fails to engage with counter-arguments and often fails to meet the standard of scholarship we should expect from an academic author, whatever he believes, unquote. That's my impression too. So, I've actually become even more confident in my beliefs thanks to Dawkins.
Thank you for your reflections and for your openness, Astrid. Who would like to go next? Maybe you, Douglas?
Yeah, it's been an interesting discussion.
And enjoyable, right? Good company?
It's been bearable.
Oh, you're hilarious, Douglas.
To your question, Professor, I can't say our discussions has fundamentally changed my outlook. I didn't think much of Dawkins to begin with. When Dawkins published The God Delusion, American philosopher of science Michael Roos wrote that it made him, quote, ashamed to be an atheist, unquote. Those are strong words. He criticized Dawkins for making arguments based on ignorance and for making unsubstantiated claims that science had disproved religion. Let's just say, I don't think reading Outgrowing God would have improved his opinion of Dawkins. So, like Michael Roos, I'm an atheist who doesn't think much of Dawkins' defense of atheism. And I can agree with atheist philosopher of science Bradley Monton when he admits that arguments for God from the finite past existence and apparent fine-tuning of our universe, quote, do have some force. They make me less certain of my atheism that I would be had I not heard the arguments, unquote. I can even appreciate that some form of deism might actually be intellectually defensible, but I don't feel the evidence forces me to abandon my naturalistic standpoint.
Thank you, Douglas, for your thoughts and your honesty. And last, but by no means least, Hiromi, what does this study leave you with?
I really liked it, although I got frustrated with Dawkins. He's quite one-sided and selective in his arguments. For example, when he emphasizes the physical origins of humans without addressing the obvious questions raised by this approach.
For example?
Well, for example, the question of consciousness. Dawkins talks about the brain as a kind of computer. He seems to completely ignore what that means for our view of consciousness, reason, morality, meaning, freedom, human dignity, and so on. It's so superficial, and he doesn't seem to realize it. I noted the quote from another book by Dawkins that Douglas referred to. I think it was during our 7th meeting. Dawkins writes, quote, the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, and no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. DNA neither knows nor cares. DNA just is, and we dance to its music, unquote. This is not just a depressing statement. I don't believe it is true. I've been thinking about this all term, saying to myself, if atheism is true, then even love is a meaningless delusion. But it seems to me that the universe really is made for a purpose, that there really is such a thing as good and evil, and that love has a meaning beyond passing on our genes. If we were to believe Dawkins, we would have no real reason to live. But the more I look at the intricacies of life, the fine-tuning of the cosmos, the joy of understanding and insight, meaningful relationships, the beauty of artistic expression, and so on, the more flat and unreal Dawkins' view of reality seems to be. The naturalistic worldview just doesn't ring true with my experience of the world. Some sort of monotheism seems much more credible, as well as more meaningful. In fact, I think monotheism makes room for a bunch of meaningful things that naturalism would dismiss as illusions. Actually, I would like to investigate the Christian claim that God invites us to relate to Him through following Jesus. I wanted to ask you, Astrid, if we could continue to meet. Maybe we could read through one of the Gospels together, if that would be okay with you.
Yes, I would love that.
Okay, thank you for sharing, Hiromi. So, we've come to the end of our little book group. You've been taking notes, and you're going to get the rest of the audio recordings. You can use this material to write your work assignments in philosophy. I must say, it has been a pleasure. You've done a great job of bringing in different perspectives and testing different arguments in a friendly atmosphere. My hope was that we would follow the university's guidelines for good discussions, showing willingness to learn and humility, goodwill, patience, and respect. You've really done that, so thank you very much. Whatever we think of Richard Dawkins' book, it has made us aware of certain issues, and it has even moved us on in our thinking, though perhaps not in the way he intended. Anyway, the book has been valuable for our purpose. Okay, thank you all very much and take care.
Thank you, Professor Sophie.
Yeah, thanks, Professor.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much.
You have been listening to The Question of God. Has our civilization outgrown God? This 12-episode podcast series is from Biocosmos Norway and Damaris Norway. On the internet, you will find it on biocosmos.no and damaris.no. Here, you will also find references and free resources. The script of the dialogues was written by Birger Elliott Benson and Peter S. Williams. It was adapted from parts of the book Outgrowing God, A Beginner's Guide to Richard Dawkins and the God Debate by Peter S. Williams, who also composed the music used in this podcast series. All voices, including mine, Professor Sophie Minerva, were performed using AI. The sound editor was Birger Elliott Benson. Thank you for listening.